Hey, this is Ryan Jones with Serverless Guru. In the previous video, I talked about potentially adding some of our configuration to the config file. It looks like we didn't do that in the last video, so let's go ahead and do that now. So we have our read capacity and write capacity, and we would also say that this belongs to the database, right? So this is a database table. So what we can do is we can add a section in the config.dev.json specifically for database information. So we can call it DB, and we can say RCU, say 1, WCU, and say 1, and yeah, we can leave it like that for now. Let's go ahead and import this. So we're going to do it the same way that we did with the default. Directly under the custom, we're going to say, instead of default, we're going to call it DB. We're going to go to config, go to the config stage file, depending on what it is. We're going to use JSON in this case, and we're going to say DB. So for our purposes, I'm going to go ahead and delete these YAML ones. I actually prefer using JSON for this. You can use YAML if you want, but I'm going to use JSON. So, okay, cool. So we have DB, and we're importing it from our JSON file, and we can change this to JSON as well. And then we can reference it by saying custom, self-custom, same way, .db, and then we can reference the WCU. So down here, we can say self-custom.db, and then we're going to look inside of our config.dev and call RCU or WCU, depending on read capacity units or write capacity units. So we can say RCU, and then we can copy this, and we can say WCU. So why would we want to do this? Well, let's say for dev, we want the cheapest possible price, because we're really not getting any production traffic, so we don't need what production has. It's just for our testing. But let's say for production, we want 100, right? So what this allows us to do is we can have a config .prod that has a WCU and an RCU of whatever it actually needs, and then our dev and test environment can have the cheapest option, because it doesn't actually matter to us. So this is how I would go about abstracting this detail out. You could take it even further, and you could actually abstract this attribute name out. However, it may even be in better interest to abstract this part into its own file. So to do that, we can actually create a resources section. So we can say resources, and then we can add a YAML file called, let's say, DynamoDB.yaml, and then we're going to basically copy this, copy all of this into this DynamoDB like that, and then inside of our serverless.yaml, we're going to reference my DynamoDB table as $file, and we're going to say go to /resources/DynamoDB, and then .yaml, and grab my DynamoDB table. So as you can see, this cleans up our code a lot, and so now we're actually abstracting the DynamoDB table into a separate file, which makes it even cleaner for us. And with that, you could even get more, kind of like tricky in how you want to work this in, but I'm sure now you can kind of see that really it's up to you how creative you want to be, but you can definitely tell the difference. Now this looks very clean, and if you imagine having maybe multiple DynamoDB tables, where you can get into the 300 line, 1000 line area with one single file, breaking it apart early and having this kind of organization is super useful, because the big thing is, like, you may understand what's happening, but the developer sitting next to you or the team that hasn't heard of anything y'all been working on, that's where they really need to see like a clean way of implementing it, not just for your project, but also for their own projects, because you can it's a very early space in serverless where you can actually make your imprint by just kind of like creating these like best practices that you've noticed in time. So as you keep growing in experience, you'll start learning what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and better ways to kind of like organize and manage this. That way, when it does come to a time where people are looking at you like, hey, what do we do? You kind of have, a path forward. So that's enough of my rant about that. Let's go ahead and try to deploy this just to make sure it's still working. So last time we deployed it to devs. Let's do that one more time. So far so good. Looks like we are updating the stack. And so we added this DynamoDB table, and we abstracted the RCU and WCU into a single config file, which will change based on stage. So super cool, and we were able to successfully redeploy. So now you can see the benefit in kind of breaking bigger resources out into a separate file. And this will help organization and also allow you to component. Basically, you're turning your DynamoDB into a component, which is an interesting point because this is the last thing that I'll say, and then in the next video I may actually talk about serverless components. So serverless just came out with something called serverless components, which allow you to do pretty much what we just did by moving it into the resources section. So now in future projects, if we wanted to create a DynamoDB table, we just copy this YAML, we copy the resources folder, and we immediately can start using dynamodb.yaml, and we don't have to rewrite it. So this is awesome. What serverless components does, which came out by the serverless framework, is it does pretty much the exact same thing. They have pre-built components similar to like what we did here, and then you can tap into that and use it in your own projects. It's still very early. It came out like last week, so publicly it came out last week or a couple of weeks ago. So they're actively working on it and making it better, but something to keep in mind. So this is Ryan Jones with Serverless Guru. I'll see you next time. Thanks.